Hi everyone! For anyone who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Lizzie and I am interning with St. Mary's for the year. I'm going to be doing our thought for the day this week. So we are going to be looking at Luke chapter 13 verses 10 to 17. I would really encourage you to pause this video and give it a read. Right, so hopefully now you've had a chance to read the passage for yourself. In this part of Luke, Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath and he heals a woman who has been crippled for 18 years. And so the first thing that struck me about it was just Jesus' compassion. Often in the Gospels, we see people come to Jesus and ask him for healing, or people come to Jesus on behalf of others and ask him to heal other people. But in this passage, Jesus approaches the woman. He sees her and he calls her. He lays his hand on her and he heals her. And I think that's just incredible that Jesus doesn't ask anything of her. He doesn't even ask her to have faith. He just sees her and his heart breaks for her. And so he heals her and frees her from years of suffering. But we also see in this passage that the synagogue leader is not happy that Jesus has just healed someone on a Sabbath. So before we dive into the passage in more detail, I think that it would be really important for us to just have a little bit of a look at the context of Sabbaths. So God commands the Israelites in Exodus 20 as part of the 10 Commandments to have a Sabbath, to on the seventh day of the week have a day set aside as a holy day to rest and worship. And this is supposed to be a reflection of God in chapter 2 of Genesis when he rests after creating the universe. And so it is God asking his people to reflect him by keeping this day holy. And so then in chapter 31 of Exodus, you see God urging the Israelites to keep the Sabbath. And God says that it's by keeping the Sabbath the people will recognize that it is God who makes the Israelites holy. And the Sabbath is to be a sign of the covenant between God and his people. So the Sabbath isn't just some casual day that the Israelites have the option to rest if they really want to, but really it's up to them. It's actually a day where they are commanded to rest. In fact, later on in Exodus, it's decreed that whoever does any work on the Sabbath is to be put to death. So it's pretty extreme. Like, God really is keen on people keeping the Sabbath. And so maybe then going back to our passage in Luke, we might begin to empathize with the synagogue leader and perhaps think that maybe he's just trying to do what's right and is trying to obey God and keep his commands. But Jesus calls the synagogue leader a hypocrite. And the word hypocrite that's used here was a Greek word that was used for people who were like acting on a stage, who would wear masks and would act from behind their masks. And so Jesus is saying that he sees them, he sees what's underneath, and he is calling them out for acting holy, for looking holy on the outside and playing the part of someone who is really seeking God's will. But Jesus sees underneath that mask, and he goes on to say to the crowd, "Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water?" So interestingly, even though the act of going and untying, that would generally be considered work, it isn't actually banned in the Sabbath. The Jewish law allows for it because the Jewish law requires Jews to prevent the suffering of living creatures. And so this allows the Jewish people to keep an animal from distress or from being mistreated, even if it's on the Sabbath. And this really reminds me of another time in the Gospels where Jesus heals on the Sabbath. So in Matthew chapter 12, there's a man whose right hand is shriveled. And the Pharisees see this man on the Sabbath and use this as an opportunity to try to catch Jesus out. So the Pharisees come up quite a bit in the Gospel. So far, a few weeks ago, Ben talked about them. And so they were people who were supposed to be teachers of the Jewish law. And there's quite a lot of tension in the Gospels between them and Jesus. And Jesus, earlier in the passage that Ben was looking at, calls them out for looking clean on the outside, but on the inside being corrupt. And so in Matthew chapter 12, it's the Sabbath, and the Pharisees see this man who's crippled, and they're trying to catch Jesus out, to be able to accuse him and bring charges against Jesus. And so they ask him if it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. And Jesus says to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out?" Jesus goes on to say, how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Jesus has so much dignity and respect for humans and for the value of each person. Where the teachers of the law see this crippled man as an opportunity, as a pawn, Jesus sees him with compassion. And Jesus answers their question, saying, "It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." So going back to our passage in Luke, Jesus is similarly asking the synagogue leader and the people who are listening in, how can you free your animals on Sabbath from temporary discomfort, but not free this woman from 18 years of being crippled? How can you not give her that freedom of 18 years of being bound, and yet you're willing to untie or unbind your animals? And so, as I said earlier in this talk, the Sabbath was meant to be a sign of covenant between God and his people. And following the Sabbath, having that as a day where you do no work, that was supposed to be a sign to God of loyalty and commitment. But that's not all the Sabbath was supposed to signify. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, we see that the Sabbath was also meant to be a sign of freedom from slavery from Egypt. And so the Sabbath was not made to enslave people, but rather it was made to be a sign that they were free to rest and free to worship God in a way that they weren't in Egypt. And it's to signify that God had brought them out of that slavery into freedom. And in Mark chapter 2, Jesus tells the Pharisees, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus is really getting at the heart of what these commands were for. He's throwing away any legalistic behavior of just keeping it for the sake of keeping it, and is getting to the heart of what was God's purpose in that. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. It can be really easy to point fingers at the Pharisees and at the synagogue leaders, but I think it's important for us to also take this as an opportunity to reflect on ourselves, on any areas in our lives where we may prioritize looking holy, or even prioritize genuinely doing what is commanded of us, but prioritize it over loving people. And we see that Jesus' command to us is to love God and to love people. He says that those are the two commandments that we should really, really be prioritizing. So I hope that this talk blessed you. Those are just some of my thoughts on Luke chapter 13, verses 10 to 17. I hope that you all have a really lovely week.